Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is getting closer to Christmas and you're watching the 700 Club. How would you like this for a shocker? The Democrats say, no way, you're not going to get any money for the wall. You can't have $5 billion. It's a slush fund. You'd just be wasting the money. And isn't that awful? But guess what? And Wendy's here with us. Wendy, guess how much we're going to give Mexico?
I know it's over $1 billion.
4.8 billion.
Wow.
We can't build the wall, but we can give Mexico $4.8 billion to Mexico.
That's incredible.
And nobody's complaining. I mean, it's just insane. Well, both sides, they said they want to reach an agreement. Yeah, in your dreams. Now there's a call for a temporary fix so it can keep the government open into the new year. And so nobody wants to shut it down. And the president has sort of eased up on it, and they're trying to find the money for the wall someplace else. We're going to tell you about how we can save a lot of money, though. But first, let's have Charlene Aaron has this report.
Congress and the administration say they want to avoid a government shutdown Friday. But while the administration has backed off its request for $5 billion to fund a border wall, the two sides still can't agree.
I think there's certainly bipartisan support for avoiding a government shutdown. And so we're now trying to figure out the way forward.
The ball remains in the president's and Republicans' court to accept one of our common sense proposals.
The White House set the tone Tuesday, softening its position by offering a proposal seeking $1.6 billion for a border wall, with an additional $1 billion for border security. That was rejected by the Democrats as slush fund.
We had a discussion about a proposal that we offered that I thought was reasonable to both sides to give us an opportunity to, in effect, thread the needle on the border security issue. I've heard back from Senator Schumer that the offer was not acceptable. And so now I'm in consultation with the White House about the way forward.
Later in the day, the administration said it could work to get the funds from other sources.
We're looking at every avenue available to us possible. The president's asked every one of his cabinet secretaries to look for funding that can be used to protect our borders and for give the president the ability to fulfill his constitutional obligation to protect the American people by having a secure border.
Senate Republicans are encouraging the president to take a short-term deal so as not to shut down at Christmas and settle the issue after the new year. But so far, the president is holding out.
President, can we ask about the shutdown?
See what happens.
Meanwhile, fears of a slowing economy is also a factor. 800,000 workers could be sent home or forced to work without pay. CBN News' Abigail Robertson says with just a few days to go before the Friday deadline, both sides have to act fast to find a resolution.
The clock is ticking. They have to reach an agreement and they have to bring it to the floor fairly soon, I'd say in the next 24 hours, in order to get something passed by that midnight deadline.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Well, I told you the other day that of the people who've come into this country illegally, a shocking number of them are on welfare. As a matter of fact, it's about 4.6 million people. And a border wall may not just help curb illegal immigration, it could help lower our national debt. John Jessup has more.
Thanks, Pat. Various studies show that illegal immigration could cost American taxpayers close to $135 billion a year, and some of that is due to government assistance, with Medicaid payments alone totaling more than $18 billion. Paul Strand talked to one researcher about the growing costs and a possible solution.
American taxpayers are footing the bill for welfare programs, and there's a major debate about how much non-citizens are adding to the cost. Stephen Camarata of the Center for Immigration Studies has just added up all the numbers.
We found that 63% of households headed by non-citizens had one or more people in that household using at least one welfare program.
According to Camarata, that's almost double the rate of American-born citizens.
In terms of food programs or Medicaid, the share of immigrant households with somebody using it is about twice that of the native-born.
Immigration advocates point to other studies refuting that claim.
The Cato Institute did an analysis of this a few months ago and found that native-born U.S. citizens actually use most public benefits at higher rates than immigrants, those who are foreign-born. And a big factor behind that is actually that many immigrants are ineligible for most forms of public benefits. So, for example, if you're not here legally, you don't qualify for public benefits.
But their children born in America do. That's one reason why the Trump administration wants non-citizens to prove they aren't what's known as a public charge. In the proposal, Homeland Security seeks to update long-standing law that those seeking to enter or remain in the U.S. can support themselves financially.
If you bring in low-wage workers, they, and very often their U.S.-born children, qualify for a host of programs. If you had to put it into a bumper sticker, it's that there's a high cost to cheap labor.
These folks are also 3 times as likely to be uninsured, causing Americans to bear much more cost.
Non-citizens in general and immigrants in general have very high rates of lacking insurance, usually double or triple that of the native-born. But what happens when someone shows up at an emergency room? They're going to get care. We're not going to not that, and it's going to come at taxpayer expense anyway.
Or at the expense of other sick people, who those hospitals will just hit with much higher bills to make up for those who got their care for free. In the end, this issue goes back to overall immigration reform, a can that Congress continues to kick down the road. One of the last times it acted came in the Immigration Act of 1990, which included a bipartisan commission to recommend policy changes. Its leader, the late civil rights icon Barbara Jordan, presented those ideas in 1995.
A properly regulated system of legal immigration is in the national interest of the United States.
They included ending chain migration and the visa lottery while allowing in 550,000 new immigrants a year with a focus on highly skilled workers. Camerata echoes that 20-year-old solution: make an immigration system that mostly takes in highly educated people, more qualified for the kind of jobs that'll let them afford insurance and keep them off welfare. Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
Pat, it's amazing decades later we're still arguing these same points.
Well, to think, get that, ladies and gentlemen, the Democrats are saying, well, we're going to hold tight. We're not going to give the president $5 billion. No way, no how. But it's going to cost $130 billion to pay for the illegal immigrants that are already here. $130 billion. Did you get that number? $130 billion, but they're squabbling over $5 billion. It is so ridiculous, and I hope the voters will understand that. Now, an expert on the early days of our country told me that in the early days, if somebody came into this country, they had to prove they could support themselves. And if after 5 years they were on public assistance, they were kicked out of the country. They weren't allowed to stay because they couldn't be a burden on the taxpayers. So they had to be able to support themselves when they got here. And if they couldn't, after 5 years, they were out. What a joke today. Isn't that amazing? Well, speaking of jokes, the judge dealing with the former Trump national security advisor didn't know the details, accused General Flynn of treason, and then said he was working for the president while he was the agent of a foreign power, all of which was not true. And when he was, Michael Flynn was at his sentencing hearing, the judge, Emmett Sullivan, quote, said, "You arguably sold your country out by acting as an unregistered foreign agent." And Flynn was charged with no such thing. He was charged merely with giving untrue statements to an FBI agent, and that, again, looked like a setup. So he didn't plead guilty to anything except lying to the FBI. And yet, at the same time, they said, well, maybe you don't want to get sentenced today, and we're not quite sure what happened. But White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said the FBI ambushed Flynn during his interview.
What we do know that was inappropriate by own self-admittance of James Comey is that the FBI broke standard protocol in the way that they came in and ambushed General Flynn, and in the way that they questioned him, and in the way that they encouraged him not to have White House counsel's office present. And we know that because James Comey told us that, and he said that the very reason that they did it was because the only reason that they did it, it was the Trump administration, and they thought they could get away with it.
It's exactly what Comey said. Any other administration, we wouldn't have pulled a stunt like this, but these people were not, they didn't have their act together, so we tried to pull something over on them. Well, the judge delayed Flynn's sentencing to give him more time to cooperate with the Mueller investigation. Of course, what everybody has said is, you don't sentence a man who you think is going to help you in future trials, because once he's sentenced, it's all over and his cooperation is finished. So they were saying no jail time, no time, and it's sort of a strange thing. But in any event, while all this is going on, the Senate passed a landmark prison reform bill on Tuesday, and it sent it to the House, and it will end automatic life sentences for third-time drug offenders, require prisoners to be incarcerated near their homes so they can be close to their families, and it boosts rehabilitation efforts. Faith leaders like megachurch pastor Jensen Franklin were instrumental in gaining support for the bill and told CBN News why it's so important.
It really is at the heart of this bill is redemption. That's the core of Christianity. That's what we need to offer people. And it's for nonviolent criminals. It's for people who are undereducated and people who, in some cases, mentally ill, who will get a second chance at life.
Well, as I said, the measure now, it passed the Senate and it now heads back to the House for final approval, where it's expected to pass. So I think people are happy about that. And Jensen Franklin's a great guy, and I'm glad he was supporting that.
Absolutely. We were able to interview him yesterday in a show that I do with Charlene Aaron called Prayer Link, and we did a live interview with him about, you know, just what he's seeing for 2019, and he says it's looking good. 2019.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. But anyhow, on this one, I mean, imagine you've got a guy that has a couple of ounces of marijuana, and he gets caught at it for the second, third time, and then all of a sudden he's got to spend the rest of his life in prison. I mean, that is insanity. But these, you know, tough on crime folks were just doing everything they could to show the voters, I'm going to get those criminals, and I'm tough on crime, and vote for me. Well, it turned out it was a disaster, and this hopefully will correct some of it, but we still are a nation of criminals, and there's not one of us who doesn't get up in the morning and realize that somewhere along the way there's some regulation somewhere. We have discovered in our news 500,000. Get that, 500,000 offenses. They can bring some kind of prison term that's been passed by federal agencies, not to mention the ones that have been passed by Congress, which is several thousand.
This was so needed, Pat, and it'll be interesting to see how far it goes to really curtail this issue.
Well, the thing that I want, Wendy, is I want the president to say, look, these federal agencies have just put these rules on that are not passed by Congress, and by a stroke of the pen, he doesn't need congressional approval. As the head of the agencies, he can say, well, I therefore cancel all these criminal penalties. And I think we lock up more people in America than even the Chinese and the Russians. I mean, we're supposed to be a free, democratic nation, but our prisons are overflowing because of these ridiculous crimes, and they cost us, you talk about billions, trillions of dollars over the years, and we've got to do something about it. So this is a step, and, you know, good for them.